So the Scream
My
franchise
bad.
came back in a big way back in 2022 with the fifth installment, aptly titled just Scream. And many people were very receptive to that movie. It had great positive critical reaction. It did very well at the box office. And so Paramount Pictures wasted absolutely no time to immediately greenlight a sequel that was going to drop merely a year later after Scream 5 from last year. And so Scream 6 just recently rolled out into theaters. Infamously, easy for me to say, infamously, whatever. I'm going to work on that word later. Courtney Cox is back for this installment, but Nev Campbell, longly associated with this franchise, is not back. She's often been the star of the Scream franchise, but due to some contractual negotiations that broke down, she chose and opted out to now return in this film. And so they have firmly placed the focus on really our lead characters, most notably Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega in this film. This movie is also noticeable because it's taking place in New York City. So this is the first time that a Scream film is occurring outside of Woodsboro, the fictional town that we mostly associate with this franchise. They're going to a brand new setting for the sixth time out to do something completely different, but it does have the same creative team from last year's film coming back into place with Radio Silence. But with all of that out the way, man, we got a chance to go check out this movie this past weekend. I will pass it over to you. What'd you think about Scream 6?
I really, really, I just really love Scream. I think as a franchise, man, it is another one of those franchises that we just kind of grew up with. It just kind of always existed, and it always existed as a staple to horror, man. It was always kind of thrown in the fray, after the first one comes out, and it was all, and really the second one too. It was always kind of thrown into the fray when people would talk about slashers. It used to be just the Halloweens, and it used to be just the Nightmare on Elm Streets, and then Scream gets thrown in. And so when I'm growing up, Scream was also always like one of those movies that just everybody knew about, man. And coming into this film, especially after the fifth one, which we reviewed again almost perfectly a year ago here, I was really excited, especially seeing the marketing for this, knowing it was going to be in New York. I was like, uh-oh, Ghostface comes to New York. What are they going to do? And the trailers looked really good, and it had me intrigued, man. And I have to say, I had a blast watching this movie. Like, I'm trying to remember like the last horror film that I just had a ton of fun in the theater with as much as I have in this movie, man, in Scream 6. Like, I had a lot of fun. This is, I think, a tremendous example of what it means to have a sequel with purpose. A lot of people have sequels and they just want to make money, and a lot of people want to. This is a sequel where they had a purpose. We even talked about if they do another one. This is after Scream 5. Me and you talking on the podcast. If they do another one, what does that look like? And we said, I said, there just needs to be a story worth telling. They have, and that's it. That's always the thing with me. There has to be a story worth telling. If so, you can have another sequel. And here they do it, man. They come out swinging. There's things in this movie that I've never seen before in a Scream movie that I absolutely love, that I absolutely enjoy. There are so many movie tropes. I don't think I've ever seen a movie as self-aware as these last two Screams have been. Scream 5 and Scream 6 are the most self-aware films that I probably should be studied. They just get it. And I think that helps with the telling of their stories, when you can look at the audience and wink and be like, this is why we're here, and this is the story we're trying to tell. So I really love that about it. You mentioned Nev Campbell wasn't here. It wasn't really a worry for me because Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega were involved, man. We seen with Scream 5 what they could do, and they show up again in Scream 6, carrying the movie. And it's really about them, man. And they really do, I think, what's needed in order to keep this movie afloat and keep the movie moving in the ways in which it should. And they even, to me, give like an emotional value to the film that even some of the other Scream movies don't have. But it's something about the chemistry between Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega, as well as the story they're trying to tell between those two characters, that it just fit to me in a Scream movie, and it makes sense for me, man. I really love the gore in this film. It's great. The kills are gnarly. Ghostface has upgraded. It is a different Ghostface. He is, I don't know, doing different things. The trailer, he's in public now. All these other things that again just didn't exist in the previous Scream that they actually come in and they do differently and in a lot of ways better here, man. So I could talk about this film a lot. It was very much anxiety inducing. Again, I had a tremendous time. And to be honest, it's probably instantly one of my favorite Scream films. It really is. A lot of people will be like, "What?" It's not going to beat the first one. The second one I still hold near and dear to my heart as well. But something about this movie, man, I really, really liked, and I think they just got it. I think they just got it.
Yeah, I think that this is the best Scream movie since Scream 2. And that's not really a tough decision for me to call. I kind of felt it instantly after we saw it. And coming into this movie, I had a lot of faith in it, just considering the fact that the same exact creative team is behind this. Radio Silence is coming back. They clearly, considering how fast this movie was put into production, they knew where they wanted to go with it. So all the signs pointed to the fact that, like, okay, they have something here. They're going to go in some different directions and do something that we haven't quite seen before. And 6 films in, which is kind of astounding, the writing, which is really the most important thing at the end of the day, the script and the writing is still as sharp as it's ever been. And the framework for this movie, there's always a framework for Scream movies because they are so self-referential. They often talk about, sort of the meta nature of pop culture and where cinema and where movies have been and where they currently are. And the framework for this one is the fact that with 6 movies now, Scream has become a franchise. And so now we've entered into even new territory. And I was wondering, well, what are they going to use? What's the device that they're going to use to bring this movie into the story, into the saga of Scream? And last year with that movie, it was often about quote unquote elevated horror, just the way that horror's changed over the course of the past 15 or so years. Now it's a franchise. And because it's a franchise, the horror rules are kind of thrown out of the book. Like now we have to lean into stuff even outside the horror genre, and nothing is off limits. Anything can be referenced. Like even outside of the horror genre, we're talking about big franchises. We're talking about big IP. We're talking about students in film school and giallo references. And we're talking about true crime culture and just like the insidious nature of the internet and just like how people become out of nowhere conspiracy theorists about things that are going on. Like it's all these different pockets and things that internet and film Twitter have really tapped into and has bubbled up over the years, but also like these things that are exacerbated by just like the content that we consume on a day-to-day basis, like the big IP, the big franchises that occupy movie theaters year in and year out. And so none of that stuff is off limits, and they come for that. And you have the monologue that breaks all that stuff down, which of course is like very witty and very fun, but they are holding back no punches at all, because even people that think that they might be safe, like if you think like you're ahead of the curve with the movie, you're like, oh, I'm totally in. Like I know who they're talking about. I know what they're referencing. It's like, no, they come for you too. It's like, they're going to say something about you too. Like you hold things in such a high regard, but like, do people really care about this shit at the end of the day? Probably not. They make a pointed decision to call that stuff out. And that's how you continue to subvert expectations with this franchise. That's how you continue to go into directions that cannot be predicted. And that's what always makes the Scream films feel so fresh. They've often taken, some longer gaps in between movies, but now like with this sort of back-to-back Scream 5 and Scream 6 duo, they have perfectly spoken to just the state of movie going and the state of pop culture, as it currently exists. And so I know we're going to do another one. There's no doubt about that. But I'm even more interested now to see like, well, what's the framework for the next one going to be? Like, how are they going to tackle something else? It's going to have to be something probably conclusive that wraps up this generation storyline in particular. And so I assume it's going to be in that vein, but we'll have to see. But you talked about New York City being a new environment. That also adds in an entirely new flavor that's not been a part of any of these films. There have been other horror films in New York in the past that I just won't really speak about here, but they've just not been successful. They have not they've not leaned into what makes New York a scary place. Like, yes, it's cool to throw sorry, I'm going to acknowledge them. It's cool to throw Jason in Times Square. Fine, let's get that shot. But is it scary? Is there really horror to that? No. And so this movie didn't actually film in New York. It filmed in Montreal. But the way that they brought New York to life and the way that they used it to service the story is what makes it genius, because I think more than any other Scream film, probably since like 2 and 1, the way that they build and use tension here is just so expertly done, because you can do things with this New York environment that you can't accomplish with other places. It's in the trailer. There are great sequences in a New York bodega, and there's great sequences in a New York subway. There are just cool, creative, conceptual things that you can do there to build tension, to get you feeling very nervous about the state of your characters that you just can't accomplish anywhere else because there's so many people walking around New York. There's alleyways, there's dark corners, there's fucking the size of human legs. Like, you just don't know what's going to go on in New York City. So it just opens up a whole new breadth of possibilities here. And so that was just a great thing to see. The performances were really strong. I liked Courtney Cox coming back here. I liked Hayden Panettiere coming back here because though we didn't have Ned Campbell, they added the legacy component to this franchise, which is a useful thing to have. I only have a couple of key disappointments. The first one, and I didn't expect this because I don't think it's ever happened with me. I clocked the killer or killers very early. I pretty much knew at the moment who they were because it felt like they pointed to them in a very obvious way. I don't know how many people picked up on it, but it felt just like very obvious to me. Like, oh, well, they just kind of gave it away, like blatantly there. And the conclusion of what the motives were and how they got there, I didn't 100% match that up, but I got pretty close. I'm like, oh, well, I kind of know what that person's motives are or what motives are. And so I didn't really like that. I thought that was kind of a missed opportunity to clock them so early because the other ones have kind of been good about, really making you sort of disbelieve, whoever's going to be the killer. Like they do a pretty good job, I think, with the whole whodunit aspect. And the only other big problem that I have with this movie is the fact that Ghostface, you talked about the gore. Ghostface is carving motherfuckers up like left and right in this movie. But
they were living.
The amount of people that just like survive,
they just be walking around.
Hey, that's a problem. Like, that's a problem we have to address. Like, it lessens the stakes. And I think that's just like an issue that they'll have to come back with. And this might be a slight spoiler. So like fast forward 15 seconds if you don't want to hear it, but more people needed to die. Like, they just should have had more deaths across the board. Like, you think a lot of people die, but that is not a thing that really happens. Like, more people should have actually died in this movie. And so I didn't like that so many people survived stab wounds. I guess just like with the whole franchise model, people's threshold for pain is just higher now. I guess we're becoming bulletproof. You got to really kill motherfuckers if you're going to really take them out. They're
going to talk about it.
It's going to take 30
the next movie.
In the next movie, like, oh damn, how do we survive this? So I think that they have to address that. Like, we have to make sure to maintain some stakes because this is like real. This is not like Fast and Furious. Like, there actually should be some actual stakes that we feel with this movie. But beyond that, man, this is just an incredible, I think another installment into this franchise. We are seeing horror, as we talked a lot about last year, living in the moment right now. I think Scream is now the number one movie at the box office. It overperformed, over-indexed what critics and pundits thought it was going to do, and so it's bringing in a lot of money. I have no doubt that they're going to make another one. That seems like a shoo-in at this point. But does it not feel like that horror movies and the horror genre now has like the greatest return on investment out of any genre in the movies right now? Like, that has to be the most surefire bet in terms of something that's going to cost the least amount of money possible, but it's going to bring back the most money possible for a film studio. I mean, we've just seen so many examples of this in the past year alone. Barbarian and Smile are just like incredible. Evil Dead Rise is right around the corner. I have very high expectations that that's going to like perform on a big level. And now Scream is having the biggest opening weekend in franchise history. 6 movies in. This is stuff that doesn't usually happen. What do you think about just like horror, sort of being like the most reliable genre out of any film genre at this point in day and age, as far as we talk about movie and theatrical film going?
It's really a different moment in time. Horror films, good horror films are hard to come by. I think that's an important thing to note because, man, you talk about in recent years, you were almost always guaranteed to be disappointed in the horror film you were going to see. It was just bad for a long time. It really was. And now it seems like just a shift is happening. And it's what's also interesting about that is it's coming after the pandemic. It feels like it was like pandemic, horror turned up. There was these couple movies before the pandemic, wink wink, Hereditary, Midsommar, and then like every / Get Out / Us, you know what I mean? It's like the Ari Aster / Jordan Peele effect, where it feels like people were just motivated. Like, I feel like something about COVID with those movies, sitting with those in COVID, people was like, man, we got to make something, and we got to make something good. And in innately, horror just always has very low budgets. It just is what it is, right? And now I think people do have stories to tell and interesting ways to look at horror, and it's great, man. I think it's really dope to see the places that we've come from with horror. Because again, it was bad. Like horror was like an example of the way it was is like Texas Chainsaw on Netflix. Like that was like every movie for like 5 years, and it was all these. Everybody wanted to make a possession movie or a demon movie or really and it was not working. But something about it now, man. It's something about that concept of elevated horror that is slightly changing things. Even though, it's funny, it's a commentary on itself, and Scream was making fun of it. It's something about that attention to detail or that thought that is changing the way and people make horror films. It's low-key a genre that's evolving. It is what it is. I think movies evolve. That's what happens. And so I think we're just living in that moment, man. And horror happens to be that best return on investment. The budgets are still low, but the stories and the things that they're trying to tell their audiences are just better than in which they were. So they're more reflective of the times in which we're in. And I think that's very beneficial for the genre, man.
Yeah, I mean, with the more artsy, quote unquote, directors that have come in lately, Jordan Peele, Ari Aster, folks like that, that they definitely have raised the stakes and elevated the game, and I think have challenged people to put more into this genre and put more thought into it, and also just what a horror movie could be, like what it could even look like. But in addition to that, you talked about post-COVID. I think that that's a really important thing. Like when people go back to the movies after being away for so long, they want to have the most visceral emotional response possible, and no genre will elicit that more than a horror movie. Like it's going to make you feel something. Even if you don't like it, you'll feel something. You'll detest it and loathe it and maybe think it's the worst shit you've ever seen, or you are going to be terrified out of your mind. It can generate all those types of feelings. And so I think when you're looking for a time out on a Friday night, horror movies have provided that sort of escape, especially coming into a post-COVID theatrical movie-going market where you need something that's going to have people feeling like that experience out is going to be worth it. And I think horror has just proven lately that it often is worth it if you have the right creative team behind it. But lots to be looking forward to with the Scream franchise. But folks, those are our thoughts on the brand new installment into the franchise, Scream 6. If you checked out this movie, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.